Welcome to GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises, the program about the book of Revelation, in which we explore the book from an intergenerational perspective. And in doing so, we often discover God's prophetic surprises in the book. I'm John Pauline. I'm a professor of religion at Loma Linda University. And with me is Nick Snell, who is a pastor in Shawnee, Kansas. We also have Shifra Fepuleai, Samoan heritage, as she made clear to me, raised in the States here, but very much appreciative of her heritage, which I also enjoy. And then we have Guillermo Borda, who's a PhD student in New Testament at Andrews University. A great team, really enjoy working together, and I've learned a lot, and I hope you as an audience are learning with us. So Nick, why don't we turn to you? And we were studying Revelation 13 and verse 15. And all of you out there, please grab your Bibles, your phones, your iPads, etc., and follow along in Revelation 13:15.
Great. And I'll be reading from the New International Version. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refuse to worship the image to be killed.
All right. I think one thing we didn't talk about last time is it mentions this idea of worship and an image and being killed. Guillermo, what's that all about? What is it referring to back in the Old Testament?
And that's a very clear allusion to the book of Daniel, chapter 3, where having heard the explanation and the revelation of his dream about the statue of different materials, Nebuchadnezzar decided he wanted to make a statue, all the same material. In the statue of his dream, the head was of gold and represented him and his kingdom. But then the other parts of the statue were made of different materials. And so also represented that there will be other kingdoms after his kingdom. In other words, Babylon would have an end. But he wanted it to last, right? So he made this statue all of gold and wanted everybody to worship that statue. And so here's a reference to that. And so what I also suggest is that this, at least I think, reminds us of the intent that Satan has. He wants his rule to last forever. He does not want there to be an end to his kingdom. But just as in Daniel 2, in the dream, there is a rock that comes and destroys that statue. We know there will be also a destruction of this false system of worship in the end.
And you know what fits with that is in chapter 12, verse 12, it says Satan knows that he has a short time. So as he sees his expiration date approaching, he's going to desperately seek ways in which to extend that period. And I think that fits with what you're saying there, that this image recalling Daniel 3 is Satan's way of seeking to gain the allegiance of all and maybe forestall his own demise. Shifra, you had something important to say about this, I think.
Yeah. Right now, what comes to my mind, just going with the flow of what's been presented, is how Revelation 12:12 says, because the devil knows that he has a short time. And, all those who are waiting that day when there will be no more sin, no more sickness, no more suffering, no more dying, all of that, no more pain, no more crying, no more tears. They will have God wipe the tears from their eyes. Mm-hmm. It's like in a short time, right? It's like Jesus coming soon. And it's like that subjective, that time description, how soon is soon, how short is short. And so I guess I wanted to talk to the one who is craving for that, that longing, yearning for, looking forward to that day, Adventists, whether by label or not, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes we can get really militant when we study the Word of God and when we look at the last days, militarizing prophetic conditions or militarizing what the criteria is for the righteous, even militarizing the process of understanding the last day events. And something I learned in a recent training, not about the book of Revelation, but I think is applicable, is instead of being militant left, which one's left? Militant left, militant right. Look to find the harmony of being missional. I don't know how to break it down quickly, except for just one thought that I have, which is, I guess, like in things about justice, one side could be saying, this is so unrighteous, this is so unjust, and so we need to fight for justice, and you can be really militant about it. The other side would be saying, oh, but if you were really Christ-like, you would be great. I don't know, you could be militant liberal, militant conservative, militant left, militant right, militant any kind of political party. But I think dying to self is a part of being missional. And so you guys can help me apply it more, but that's kind of where I went with it, because there's a craving, there's a yearning for that short time to happen already, that soon to be sooner than it has been. And when we get anxious about God's timing not being our timing, that anxiety that comes from being misaligned with God's scheduling, I guess, can lead us to the extremes. And we can find ourselves in a polarized, divided church, polarized, divided country, being militant. And I just, you guys can help me break it down further and go whatever way. But I think one of the key things is to come away from those polarized, militant places into something that's more harmonious by being missional, the Great Commission.
One thing that just pops into my mind as an Adventist college kid that I was, when I hear the word missions, often the word service comes right after it. So thinking of how can we serve? Because when it feels like this cause should have been, done yesterday or a long time ago, it should be fixed already. I can see how we try to do it quickly, and we want to control, and we're just very direct, and direct can be good, but to keep that service mentality and the way people are going to receive things and be willing to change, it comes with them having a level of freedom, and you convince through love and service the best way, I think. So that's something that just came to mind with what you were sharing.
And we don't become scared of doing justice. We don't become scared of doing justice. We don't become scared, or because now we found a way to do it missionally in the Great Commission of spreading God's love to all people. Tag, you're it.
Very good. I think you guys landed that plane, so I'll move on. All right, verses 16 and 17, Nick. Let's get into the mark of the beast, something a lot of people probably want to hear about.
Yeah, 16 and 17, NIV. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name.
All right, so we have a mark going on here on the forehead and the hand. Any Old Testament background here? The book of Revelation almost always has an Old Testament agenda somewhere. You can't really understand it unless you bring in the Old Testament. Anybody think of an Old Testament background here?
Yes. If you go to Deuteronomy Chapter 6, you have this mention of these two body parts as well, the forehead and the hand. So Deuteronomy Chapter 6, and then you have it right in verse 8. You shall also tie them as a sign to your hand, and they shall be as frontlets on your forehead. But it's not a mark of the beast that is going to be as a sign on the tied to the hand or frontlets on the forehead. But the context here, when you go before the text, is referring to the commandments of God, the things that he's commanding. You see verse 6, these words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. In verse 7, and you shall repeat them diligently to your sons and speak to them when you sit in your house, when you walk on the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. In verse 8, you shall also tie them. So these are the things, the words that God is commanding, the things that God commanded. So think about the commandments of God, the things that God commanded them. They were to have them very, very present in their lives. It was to be a part of their family conversations, how you raise their children. But it's very interesting that they have this connection with the forehead and with the arm, the law of God, the words of God, the commandments of God on your forehead and on your arm. And now here in this eschatological context, you have this mark of the beast. Instead of the law of God, is the mark of the beast. Now, that is to be placed. But it's interesting, it's either on the forehead or on the arm. So there's some difference there.
Right. So we have a background here in Deuteronomy 6, and that's also the place where it says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Love the Lord with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. And it's often been pointed out that this is the first table of the commandments. The commandments about worshiping God. Love your neighbor as yourself is the second part of the commandments. Now, we are Seventh-day Adventists, and when we come to this text, we tell people this is all about the Sabbath. But the word Sabbath doesn't appear in the book of Revelation. So how would you explain to someone that the Sabbath is a crucial issue in the final crisis that we're seeing here in Revelation 13? Where's the Sabbath here?
Two things. Well, Sabbath is in the commandments. And if you look at that passage in Deuteronomy, it's Sabbath is part of the commandments that were written on the tablets given to Moses from God. Two, my favorite way of spelling Sabbath is Trust. And I think that speaks to the heart of the beauty and the sign, which is a very interesting thing that the Sabbath would be a sign. So maybe I'll just leave that there for now. Those two things.
So how do you see Sabbath as trust? Unpack that a little bit, because I think that's an important idea.
Okay, I can give a stab at it, but I'm happy if anybody else wants to give a stab at that.
Yeah.
Well, you have the idea that on the Sabbath, for example, when the people of Israel were in the wilderness, they were not to go and pick up the manna. They were to pick it in double portion on the sixth day. Now, any other day, the first, second, third, fourth, fifth day of the week, if they were to get a double portion, it would not. It would expire. It would go spoil. It would not be good for consumption the next day, with one exception. On the sixth day, they could collect a double portion, and on the Sabbath, it would still be good for consumption. So the Sabbath was also a day that the people were to rely on God, to trust Him, to trust that He provides for them. They don't have to go out and plow their fields. They don't have to go out and collect manna. They don't have to go out and collect wood for the fire. They just go and rest in God and with Him.
Now, when I was on the island of Guam, I met a man who had the biggest, beach resort. He was the owner of the biggest beach service area. Notice they did stuff like hang gliding and what are those little like motorcycles that go on the water?
Jet skis.
Jet skis, yeah, jet skis, and swimming, and they drag these big old torpedoes, and people sit on them and get knocked into the water and think it's fun, stuff like that. So he owned this place that managed all of these activities on the main beach in the island of Guam, and he attended some meetings and became convicted that God wanted him to keep the Sabbath, but Saturday was the biggest day of the business. the biggest day of the business. And he didn't feel like he could do that without his employees. So he gathered his employees together and he said, I'm really sorry. He says, this is what I'm going to do. It may not work well for us. He says, but I want you to know we'll do what we can to take care of you, but I'm convicted that we're going to do this. And almost instantly, all the hotels that he had contracts with broke those contracts. They said, if you're not going to take people on Saturday, we can't use you. And so Friday night, and this first Friday, he turned on the phone, the phone messaging system, and closed the office and left.
Amen.
And Saturday night after sundown, he got back to the phone, and it was messages off the charts of people asking for Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. He says his business actually got stronger after that. And I actually got to spend a day at his operation and to meet some of the other employees, and they absolutely adored him. You could just see that they just thought this was the greatest thing on earth. So this, to me, that story is what you were talking about, Schiff, the story of trust. That the Sabbath is saying that 6 days a week I'm going to do my work, I'm going to take care of myself. But there's one day in which I'm just going to trust that God's going to take care of me. And leave it in his hands. So the Sabbath actually is not a legalistic thing. Do this so you'll be saved. But the Sabbath is a way of saying, I can't feed myself unless God grows the plants. I can't earn money. I'm keeping Sabbath, etc. But I'm going to trust that God will take care of me as he's promised to do. And so the Sabbath becomes, and trust is what faith is all about. If you're saved by faith, you're saved by trust. You're trusting that God is willing to save you. And that ties it a bit together. But still, we're back to the thing, we're talking Sabbath generally, but where's the Sabbath in the book of Revelation?
Well, if you go back to chapter 13, so there's this one evidence, at least of that we see, there seem to be the commandments seem to be at stake here is the issue of the forehead and the right hand, tying with Deuteronomy 6, verse 8. But you also see throughout chapter 13, a systematic attack against the commandments of God, especially the first table of the 10 Commandments. Now, you have explicitly the first 3 commandments. First, you have worship of the dragon and the beast, which is an explicit violation of the first commandment of not having other gods. Second, you have the worship of the image, which is an explicit violation of the second commandment of the Decalogue. And then you have the blasphemies. You have the blasphemies both in verse 1, 5, and 6, chapter 13. You clearly have blasphemies going on, clear violation of the third commandment. And then where's the fourth commandment? You don't see this very explicit reference to the fourth commandment. However, when you put together chapter 13 and 14 as alternative perspectives, as the different sides of the conflict, right? In chapter 13, you have the side of the unholy trinity, Satan, the dragon, and his beasts, and the people that follow them. And in chapter 14, you have the people that follow the Lamb and the 3 angels that proclaim these messages of warning.
I want you to hold on that thought.
Oh, sure.
I like that beautifully. You showed how the 2 chapters sort of parallel, and I want you to continue with that. But I do suggest that we can find the Sabbath in chapter 13 too. You mentioned the first 3 commandments are being counterfeited, but here you have, the forehead and the hand. That reminds us of the first table of the law. And Deuteronomy is a covenant. And in ancient covenants, those are agreements that people made in ancient times with each other. In those covenants, at the heart of the covenant, there would be a seal. And the seal would contain the name, the territory, the authority. Why does that person have the authority to make this contract? All right. Within the 10 commandments, the only place where you have that combination, the name of God, the basis of his authority, the territory he rules, is the 4th commandment. I am Yahweh, your God, who made heaven and earth, the sea. So creation is the basis of his authority. Heaven, earth, and sea is the territory that he rules. So, and this is not a Seventh-day Adventist thing. Many scholars, Old Testament scholars, have seen Deuteronomy as a whole as a covenant, and the Ten Commandments as covenants. So the reference there to the forehead and the hand brings us back into this covenant context of Deuteronomy, where the Sabbath is the sign of the covenant, the seal of the covenant. Not explicit. You're going to do better than that, Guillermo, in a minute. But it shows that the whole first table of the law is at stake in chapter 13. The beast wants to be God in the place of God. The beast sets up an image to be worshipped. The beast blasphemes God. The beast sets up this counterfeit mark, this counterfeit sign of the covenant. So you have the table set for that. But in chapter 14, Guillermo, what were you leading us to?
Yeah, then when you get to chapter 14 and you go to the messages of these three heavenly messengers, these three angels, then you have this reference to, let me just open there, chapter 14, I believe is verse 7. Yes, verse 7, the message of the first angel, where he says, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heaven and the earth and sea and springs of waters. And here, this very much reminds us of the language in the fourth commandment that you brought up when you were explaining that idea of the fourth commandment as having some features of a seal, right? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we also should be reminded, using the Old Testament context, that the Sabbath was a sign between God and his people. As you see in Exodus 31, the Sabbath was a sign between God and his people. So as the Sabbath is a sign between God and his people, now the dragon wants to have a counterfeit sign, a sign that will go, if we understanding this correctly, as at least this is my understanding, a sign that will go against the sign of God. They will go against the Sabbath, against the whole law of God, but including against that sign in terms of the Sabbath, which is to point us to the Creator whom we are to worship, as the first angel reminds us.
Okay, so Guillermo points out in Revelation 14:7, you have as strong an allusion to the Old Testament as you have anywhere in the book of Revelation. It's an allusion to the fourth commandment. And notice this, chapters 13 and 14 are full of worship. Worship the dragon, worship the beast, worship the image of the beast. If you'll take the time to count them, I challenge our listeners to do this. Count the word worship, noun or verb. Count the word worship in chapters 13 and 14, and you'll find that it's 8 times. 7 times it's a reference to the unholy Trinity. 1 time, and 1 time only, it's a reference to the true God. And that's in chapter 14, verse 7. That makes 14:7 the most important verse in this entire section of the book of Revelation. It's the centerpiece of the book.
Wow.
So the Sabbath plays a significant role. And Guillermo pointed out that there's some sort of counterfeit of Sabbath that will be like the image of the beast counterfeits the image of God. There's going to be a counterfeit of God's Sabbath at the end of time. We'll get to that in the next program. But for right now, I want to throw this question out there. And that's the idea of how do you relate the Sabbath to the idea of character that we saw? You know, in the last program, we saw that the image of the beast is Satan's character being molded into his idols, you know, his people. In contrast to that, God is seeking to build his image, his character into all of us. How do you tie, you know, people sometimes say, well, either the mark of the beast is character or it's Sabbath or some other issue. It doesn't have to be either or. how would you put together Sabbath? What does Sabbath have to do with character? Anyone want to tackle that?
I have a short answer, but I did see Nick. I saw your hand up earlier.
Oh, yeah, they were going at it. I was just thinking of other instances in the scriptures where it talks about mark. I think of Cain having a mark on his head so that no one would hurt him after he had killed Abel. And then there's this really interesting passage in Ezekiel chapter 9, where basically I don't feel like I'm super familiar with this story, but it came to mind and I looked it up, and there's going to be this like cleansing of the temple or something. My section in Ezekiel chapter 9 calls it the judgment of judgment on the idolaters. And basically there were these people that got a mark on their head, and if they had that mark on their head, they would be spared. And they were spared because they actually cared about the temple, those who are weeping over the temple being desecrated or whatever. And so those people that really cared got a mark on their head. And I noticed that in both of these places that I thought of, Cain and here in Ezekiel 9, there's this promise of protection, right? And then here in Revelation 13, you're only protected if you have the mark on your head or your hand, but you're protected or you're given full access to food and buying and selling and all that only if you have the mark. So he is kind of doing a counterfeit there as well. As far as what it has to do with character, I think that we're very familiar with some of this in our American culture, that you are worth what you can accomplish. You're only safe in what you can do. And so Satan is saying, basically, you're good if you have the same mindset that I do, that you are what you do, you're worth what you can accomplish. And that's the opposite of trust, right? That story that Dr. Pauline shared earlier was so awesome. And so if you're living after the image of the beast, you're becoming more beast-like, right? Where if you are living, worshiping God, spending every Sabbath worshiping him, your character is going to be more in line with trust and peace in him. Only he gives that.
So that's supporting Shifra's idea of trust as central to the Sabbath. We have about 45 seconds. Does anybody have a short?
3 words.
Yes.
I have 3 words. Righteousness by trust.
Righteousness by trust. Yeah. Righteousness by faith.
Right.
Trust is all about. And the Sabbath reminds us of creation. And at creation, God gave human beings a beautiful world. He gave them freedom. And he gave them the power to create little ones in their own image. So God's gifts were tremendous, and the Sabbath is a place where we focus on what God has done, rather than on what we have done. But there's a counterfeit in this passage, and we'll come to that next time when, again, we do GPS, God's prophetic surprises.